while other countries are still in recession and fighting, we have since left recession. We only have 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And since then, GDP has been positive and it's going higher. So these are good things that the country is doing that it needs to be applauded for. And one other thing is that this government is now doing more in terms of infrastructural development, but with less revenue available. Unlike when we had so much of revenue, but there wasn't any infrastructure to show. Today we see projects, we can touch the projects, we can feel the projects. Like the second Niger Bridge is no longer a story. We were told about it before. For so many years, it was budgeted for. But we never saw any pile come up. We never saw any pillars. But now, that bridge is connected from Delta to Anambra. So you can see it, you can walk through it, you can feel it. And this is at a time when revenues, like I say, have depleted.
Did we not have GDP growth of 3.98% in Q4? What is the impact on the people? What is the impact on businesses? I just told you all the critical issues. We can sit here and be projecting, yes, oil price is increasing, there's a relationship between GDP growth and oil price. And so what? You go out there and tell the business person or tell the man whose purchasing power has been massively eroded that the GDP is growing. I mean, they will look at you in the face and wonder what you are talking about. We need to address critical issues of inflation, of the weakening purchasing power, of the depreciation in the exchange rate, of the terrible situation with energy. These are the very important things. We begin to talk of GDP growth, those things are becoming more academic, especially in our current circumstance.
And that's the controversy which we seek to try to unravel this morning. You just listened to the Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, Mr. Clem Agba, talking about how the country is out of a recession, unlike many other countries. We're recording some positive growth, etc., etc. And you've also listened to those in the real sector. Mr. Muda Yusuf wasn't mincing words when he was saying that that's basically an academic exercise. I wonder what our guest in the studio will have to say on both sides, whether he'll be able to find a line linking the two. Professor Magnus Pakol is Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center. He is former Chief Economic Advisor to the President and CEO of the National Planning Commission, and also a former Professor of Economics, University of Dallas in Texas in the United States. Prof, you're welcome to Sunrise Early this morning.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm always happy to be with you.
Well, you have listened to both gentlemen speak, one from the side of government, trying to explain just what government is doing and how this is affecting the overall numbers. But if you drill down, you've heard the complaint of Mr. Muda Yusuf, who's saying it's not really translating to much. This growth which you're seeing in the figures which government is talking about is not translating to much. Inflation is biting. In fact, there are those who say we're now in the period of stagflation and that there's very little to report in terms of actual growth for the masses and many more people being lifted out of poverty. We're rarely saying that. What exactly is a disconnect?
Interesting. Well, basically, the problem we have in the country is the problem of not being able to produce goods and services, the goods and services that people of the world want. So if you drill it down, it's a human capital problem. So what that means is that we don't have the skills, we don't have the attitude, we don't have the behavior, we don't have a culture that is focused on producing goods and services. And it translates into the leadership. So you see, people want to be president, they want to be governor, they want to be whatever, but they are not really, in my view, concerned about how to raise output. And until you raise output, you don't raise incomes. And if you don't raise incomes, you continue to see the agony that you see in the faces of the people when you go to the villages. You go to the rural areas and you see people that look very different from people in the urban areas. You see poverty on their faces. Those guys are also literally underemployed. There is a way that we measure underemployment, and we use our statistical models and from the International Labour Organization and others, and we measure underemployment. But you could also measure underemployment by looking at what is happening, looking at people's faces and seeing this guy is suffering malnutrition. And if they are suffering malnutrition, then they are not going to have the full capacity to be able to produce the goods and services that people want. They may not also understand how to do it. So, underemployment is not just because you have a degree in something and you're doing something else, or that you're not able to do what you would have wished to do, but is that in many cases that you don't really have the capacity. In other words, you can't even, you're sick. You want to do a job, but you're sick. You're lying down in your house, in your thatch house. You don't have the nutrition. You don't have the health facilities and the means, to get yourself up to where you can be competitive with the people of the world. That's what the problem is. If you look at our leaders as they campaign now, they go to the urban areas, they go to the major cities, but the bulk of Nigerians are in the rural areas. They're not talking to them. So what they need to be talking about is, how do we produce goods and services? That's what the problem is. Now, so we look at the inflation numbers.
But somehow, I mean, regardless of the fact that, you say that the major problem is how do we produce goods and services.
Yes.
Mr. Muda Yusuf is in the real sector. He certainly will tell you that, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has been trying its best. They are producing something, and he can read out a whole full scope sheet of the problems that producers are facing. It's not attractive to be a producer. The environment is really challenging for those kinds of people. So the question is, because government only sees itself in providing a role of infrastructure. I mean, when you listen to Mr. Clem Agba, who was talking about how there's now infrastructure, the second rail line is now being produced, beg your pardon, the second Niger bridge is now a manifestation, it's no longer on the paper. The rail lines all over the country, there'll be talk around that as well. And then there's also deliberate efforts to try and soften the poverty, the effect of poverty on people who are really vulnerable through the Ministry of Humanitarian Services. So as far as they are concerned as a government, they seem to be doing what they need to do. But still, somehow, there is a huge deficiency in terms of what the real sector needs to be able to, really take off and thrive. From your own estimation, what more do you think that government can do to really support the real sector, apart from building infrastructure, which is needed? What more can they do to ensure that the real sector really is able to stand on its 2 feet?
Well, that's good. The point is, as you actually said it, there is grave deficiency in the things that we need to see done. So, yeah, it's true. I mean, you could build some bridge somewhere, but that doesn't provide jobs all over the country. I mean, you even see, they talked about the GDP rising, that we're coming out of recession. That's true. But 3.4% GDP growth rate, that just means that you are recovering. See, you have to look at where you were. You were at the bottom of the pit. You were in the pit. So you're growing out of a pit. You're not even on the surface yet.
Are we really growing out of the pit?
Well, because you have a positive number. Anytime you see a positive number, it means that you are growing. But the fact of the matter is that what I usually call that immiserating growth. You're still growing at a rate where it favors some people. So people see others doing well, but the masses are not doing well. And they then really can see their misery. stand right in their face because they see that these are the small number of people that are doing well, but they are not. That's what these kinds of growth rates do. But if you start to have growth rates in the 10% range, 12% range, then you're capturing a lot of people. So it's a matter of capture. How many people are involved in this economic performance that maybe the minister or somebody is talking about? That's really what matters. And the poverty rate we see in the country is mostly in the rural areas.
Should we be questioning the items that go up to measuring the inflation rate, even the items that go up in measuring the GDP, the general GDP? Should we be questioning the items in that basket?
Not necessarily, because they're the typical items that are used. The problem is that we need to rev things up in such a way that you involve a large number of people. That's other countries that have done very well. That's what they have done. In China, that's what they have done. They've been very intentional about creating goods and services that the people of the world want. I mean, if we look at our country, what are we known for producing?
You said
that's the thing. Because I look at other countries, I can tell you what they're known for producing. If I go even within countries outside of Nigeria, especially in the advanced economies, I can see what particular cities are known for producing. We have to be known for producing stuff. If you're not known for producing stuff, then you will stay poor. And then the problem now that we have is that that's why the exchange rate is working against you. So you have a pass-through effect. You have your currency weakening. It passes through inflation, passes through into inflation in the country. Now, look, you can't have people be happy in a situation where food inflation is near 20%. And 20%, and then last year it was near 20%. And your income is not rising by 20% each time. So people really, that's what's hurting people. The statistical numbers, you can begin to say, oh, things are doing well. It's just like what fools people is, if I tell you now that, oh, inflation is trending down, but you go to the market and you say the prices are going up, that's true, because inflation is not, that inflation is trending down does not mean that prices are going down. It just means that prices are rising, but not rising as fast as last year. So that's what people are seeing. So people are seeing rising prices, whether it be 13% or 20%. They see rising prices on top of the rising prices of last time. What's going to stop that is the production of goods and services. So that is the problem.
Let me flip this conversation out to my colleagues in Lagos. Gentlemen and lady.
Thank you, Mokwe. Prof, let me begin, by even asking a question around some of the things that you have said. You've talked about the fact that a sizable number of people are not doing as well as the figures say. And that is something a number of people would consider quite troubling. Having headed or ran the poverty eradication program, or is it poverty alleviation program, what are the things that you would say are faulty in the structure of improving the economy? You have talked about the need for us to produce massively, and hopefully that would help to alleviate, to at least to reduce the number of on the poverty rank or rung, as the case may be. What, in your opinion, is wrong with the structure of the economy that hasn't made it possible for us to produce and reduce the negative figures that we have: unemployment, inflation, poverty, and the rest of them?
So you want to discuss restructuring, basically?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
What is wrong?
Not necessarily.
But when you say, but it's okay. No, you're fine. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. You can stick with that. That's not a problem, because you are right. Something is wrong with the structure. So the problem is that the federal government is too heavy, and it literally breaks everything it sits on. So it's too fat. So we've got to. It has to lose weight. And it has to shed some of that weight so that especially at the local government level, people can be more involved in the production of goods and services. I have to keep on chiming back to this production of goods and services that I keep talking about. Now, so at the highest levels of government, let's say at the federal level, let's just say at that tier of government, we think that we can solve all the problems of the country, but we cannot. We don't have the capacity to do it. And as you talked about poverty alleviation or poverty eradication, The only way the government can be really active and successful and efficacious with their measures is if they have the resources, but they don't have the resources. Government revenue is trivial. And so they are not going to have the capacity to be able to do the things that they want to do. The way to have the capacity, and I want every government leader to understand this at every level, is that we have to be very intentional, very clear, very methodical, very systematic about producing goods and services. We have to say, this is every person running for office, wanting to come to office, what should be in their mind is how do we improve on the skills of our people? And when we talk human capital, it's not that you just go to the university. I mean, you can, at the village level, even a person that never went to school can get something that I call tax-specific human capital. You train them. We need to train Nigerians. Nigerians should be trained and developed. So it's not really just about training, it's training and development. Some of the very successful companies around the world, what they do is they do training and they develop them. That means that they tell them how to use the training to produce goods and services, to produce economic value. That is what the problem is with a country. If you look at the exchange rate, the reason why the Naira is suffering is because we don't have stuff that we can export to other parts of the world. That's what the problem is.
Why? Just one quick one, Prof.
Because we are not producing.
Is that the reason that the policies...
We know what the problem is.
Just a quick one, Prof.
I mean, when this government did come on board, oil prices were really low. Oil prices are oil is the mainstay of our own economy, and it's so bad that we don't even refine it. We export it in its crude form. And the prices were really low, so much so that we knew that we needed other sources of income.
Sure.
So we started diversifying. At least a little more attention was paid to diversification. And it was seen that maybe in the first year or so, there was some progress recorded in terms of, how the other sectors were doing relative to oil. Even till today, they keep talking about the progress that the non-oil sector is making. Yeah. The question is, why haven't we been able to translate that into exponential growth? Sure. The kind of growth, if a sector is doing well, we'll think that by now we should have been able to, what's the word that business people use now? Is it expand that particular sector in such a way that it's able to accommodate more people? What are the challenges we're facing there?
It means the sector is not doing well. That's what it means. The non-oil sector grew, I think, somewhere a little over 4% in the last estimation. So 4-point-something%. But from where? From very low level. That's not good enough. You need to be growing at 12%, 10%, 12% in that range. If you're growing at 3%, 4%, okay, look at agriculture. The bulk of our population is in that sector of the economy, but it is growing at 2-point-something%. It has never grown near 5% in the last probably 10 years. So you can't really be talking about real productive activity if you're not growing at a very sharp rate. So you can't grow at 2.3% every time, every quarter, and then you say that there's growth in agriculture. So there's growth in the non-oil sector. It's true, there's growth, but it is not the kind of growth that we want. So the point I'm making is that it won't happen until you train the people. You also look at research and development. There should be collaboration. I talk about 3 pillars. Collaboration between the academia, business, and the government. We should have these things at every local government office should have this arrangement where they are meeting with their people and saying, how do we project our local government to the world? That's why when he's talking about restructuring, I said, well, that's the point. The federal government should be more interested in their catalytic efforts. They should be ready to train people at the local government levels and at the state levels. That's where their effort should be concentrated. And because where the activity is at the local government level. But we neglect them. So we stay at the federal level and we pontificate and we do one thing and we pontificate on it. But that's not translating into anything substantial and meaningful to the guy at the bottom of the pyramid.
So basically, unless we are able to wake the local governments up, we're going to be dancing around.
We got to train them because they don't have the capacity to do it. So we need massive training. What do companies do? The government should look at corporations. That's what they do. When you see the best corporations, what do? They train their people to be the best. So when you train the people are able to do it. Even the leaders should be trained. When you talk of leadership, is a type of human capital. You have to know, you have to have the skills to be a leader. And you have to have the temperament, the attitude, the behavior to be a leader. So we need to build that kind of culture, a culture that promotes this can-do spirit, that is intentional, that is decisive, that understands how things work in the world. Your leader at the local government level has to know that he's competing with a person like him or her in another country. They're all pouring goods into the global market space. So he has to check, or she has to check, and say, well, what good is coming from my local government area? If he sees none, then he has a problem.
It's a real big problem. Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about the meetings that the federal government has been holding, because you talked about that tripartite, or let's say that tripod business, the academia. Right now, the academia is on strike. Right. We've also had the problem with security, which is a major problem, because when you talk about agriculture constituting a major part of that non-oil export, and we've been saying what is happening with security. Do you think that there's so much more that we can do in terms of reviving the confidence that people feel, or that people should feel, in being able to go back to the farms and invest in agribusiness to actually get that sector up and running?
So you have a vicious circle that comes again from this human capital problem. And then, so when people are not well trained and they don't know what to do and they can't produce goods and services, then they go to untoward behavior. So then they get radicalized. They become free radicals. They go out there and they cause all kinds of problems. And people who are looking to cause problems and make an income or expand their philosophy or ideology of that, they go and they hire these guys and they pay them well. And these guys kill one or two persons and they get promoted to be generals in their scheme. And these guys terrorize the masses. They terrorize the regular person. And the people are afraid. The people cannot go to their farms. And that's why we've seen food prices rise. It's not just because wheat prices have gone up in Ukraine. This is a problem we've been having all this time. I mean, how much do we really import from Ukraine? Not that much in terms of it to affect agriculture or food consumption in Nigeria, not that much. Perhaps even import more from Russia than from Ukraine. But even then, so it's not because people try to say, oh, it's because they've heard people say on TV that people in Europe are having inflation prices because of the war in Ukraine. But that's not what our problem is. Our problem is fundamental. Our problem is the inability to find the leadership that can focus on this. And sometimes you get partnerships. I mean, it's something we don't really even talk about, is we need to look at our guys in the diaspora. We need to look at, let's say, African Americans that have skills. We need partnerships. I mean, we need to be able to talk to people outside that we can work with and say, how do we produce goods that we can sell outside?
What kind of partnerships would they be providing?
Well, they bridge the human capital gap that I talk about, so that you don't have to wait and go to school for 30 years and get 5 PhDs. You go to the guy who knows it in Chicago, that is from your village, that is successful in Chicago, and say, hey, come, we want to do such and such and export to Chicago. We're seeing that in Chicago, people are buying this kind of things. Can you come and help us and go home and do this? We have this partnership between business, university, and the government, and we want the people to do it. He said, oh yeah, that he makes money, you make money, everybody's happy, we hire people. But the leadership has to be intentional about doing that. Because the regular guy is not going to just be able to get up and run to Chicago to go do that. I mean, I just use Chicago as an example. But you have to formulate, you have to have a leadership that understands that. A leadership that is prepared to learn. So if the leadership is not prepared to learn, then there will be no change. There has to be change.
Let me flip this now. I understand Lagos wants to come into this conversation.
Right, Mark, thank you very much. Well, Prof, if the leadership does not want to learn, let's try the followership, at least the followers. Let's see if we can help them learn this morning. And I'd like you to speak to this, the human capital conversation that you raised earlier on. So you have the average Nigerian staring at the inflation figures. Clearly, purchasing power has dropped. The wages, income is not increasing. If anything, some would say it's even dropping. So how should the typical average Nigerian approach this economy? What should be the posture such that they can get the best out of it? So this is essentially trying to arm Nigerians with life skills to survive, this economy. What should they be doing?
That's a very, very, that's a wonderful question. The average Nigerian is really very ingenious, very creative. And when I talk about human capital, for example, it is not human capital just because you have a certificate or that you've got some training, but it is human capital because you're able to produce stuff. You're able to produce economic value. So every Nigerian should begin to then look at collaboration. Who do I collaborate with? I mean, you may be in Port Harcourt, but the guy you want to collaborate with is perhaps in Kano. You need to go find them. You need to, and that's why, again, you need some help sometimes from others as intermediaries. So, but people have to sit and say, how do I produce stuff? So if there's a message that I want to pass to folks, being that they're already creative and ingenious, sometimes I really get amazed, how we've been successful in Nigeria, and I think it's just because of the ingenuity of the people. The people are by themselves naturally very creative and ingenious, and they are doing wonderful things. I go on the shelves and I see new things that are happening by themselves. You got people who are providing their own electricity, 24 hours. Restaurants, they've got to run because you can't wait for NEPA, whatever they call it now, to come. So they got to produce their generator, they got to run their generator. The guy at any shop, if you're manufacturing stuff, you got to be running your generator. It's extremely expensive. The price of diesel is doubled, more than doubled from since last year. The price of kerosene is even worse. People don't talk about the price of what's happening with the price of kerosene. In like Bielsa, the increase from last year is like 120-something% for kerosene. So so that they're able to still produce what they produce is amazing. So that my message is that just continue to do what you're doing. But the most important thing, there's one very important thing for the masses, and that is elect the right person. So if you don't elect the right person, then you're going to continue to be in this predicament. So if I was to tell something to the regular guy out there, be sure that you understand these guys that are running around looking for your vote and elect the right person.
Prof, before we get to the point where we begin to, consider who would be elected, the problems are still staring us in the face. And I'd like us to look at some of the whys now. Aren't some of these economic challenges self-inflicted when you consider that, Nigeria's debt-to-revenue ratio is at a whopping 85%? I imagine if I'm earning 100,000 naira, for instance, and I'm paying 80,000 naira every month as debt, can some of those funds be freed up, to fund some other critical sectors of the economy begging for attention?
I mean, how will you free them up? That's the problem. The reason why you're borrowing is because you ain't got it, because you don't have it. That's why a man doesn't go out and borrow money if he already has it. So they're borrowing it because they don't have it, because they cannot generate it. They can't tax it because the people don't have it. And then we're not very efficient. Again, another critical problem is the allocation of the resources. We are not very efficient in allocating our resources. So if you don't do that, then you're not going to get maximum output from it. Then you will not have money to use to pay on your debt or to create services, be it in health, education, or what have you. So the problem the country has, the reason we have the very high debt-to-revenue ratio is because, one, the revenue base is small. So if your revenue base is small, it tells me that your production base is small because you get revenue from production. That's why I keep talking about production. So we got to increase that. Then you say don't borrow. But if you don't borrow, then things collapse. So you have to borrow because you got to do the thing that you're supposed to do. So we are in a catch-22 situation. The problem if you borrow, the problem that you can't raise revenue. So again, it comes down to leadership. So that means go find the guys that you believe can solve these problems. And this is the time to do it.
From now till next year, because right now we know that we're entering the thick of the political season, how much progress do you think that we can make in terms of the projections that government initially had to lift 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years?
But if it's a very good pronouncement to lift 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years, that's a very nice thing to say.
I'm just asking how much progress you think we can make between now and when they leave office, for instance.
Well, you can live well too out of poverty between now and then, but you ain't going to be able to lift a whole lot of people because you don't have the capacity to do it.
So
the intention is good, but you don't have the capacity to do it is the problem. So we got to build a capacity. Well, luckily we said 10 years, so there's time. So, but it's something that can be done, but it's the number one antidote to poverty is jobs. So we have to have a society that's ready to work. So whether the work is by taking a job with somebody or by being an entrepreneur, but that's what you need to build, a society ready to work. When you have a society ready to work, then you're ready to compete with anybody anywhere in the world. And I think that that's what the focus is. So, I mean, we can go and be looking at the inflation numbers. Oh, it was 2% last year, then it's 15%. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, if you're not producing stuff, that's where we can just keep reading those numbers. We know the numbers. Inflation is high. Food inflation near 20%. But headline inflation near 17%. So if you just recite that, what does that mean? So the thing is, how do we correct that? You correct that by producing stuff. And how do you produce stuff? By knowing how to produce it. If you don't know how to produce it, you cannot produce it. Therefore, we should be intentional about knowing how to produce it. And then we should find a way to educate the people. This insecurity is not always from the fact that the economy is bad. It's also from ideologies. So we have ideologies that then pervade society. So we have to do training there too, in our mosques and in our churches, in society, to let people understand that in the long term, this consumes everybody. So that's also very important. Not just looking at the critical economic indicators, but looking also at our culture and our behavior and our dogmas and doctrines and philosophies.
Well, certainly a lot of work to do, certainly a lot of work on our hands. We have to thank you so much for, laying it very bare and making it as simple as possible. Thank you so much for coming on this morning. Professor Magnus Pakol is Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center. He is a former Chief Economic Advisor to the President and CEO of the National Planning Commission, and also former Professor of Economics at the University of Dallas in Texas in the United States of America. Thank you so much for coming on once again. We'll take a break now. We'll be back to continue this discussion with another perspective in just a moment. Please stay with us.